My wife demanded the house, said I can't afford a lawyer. I told her, fine, take what you want. What she didn't know was, what I had next would cost her everything. It's strange how quiet a house feels after someone decides it no longer belongs to you. The first night after she said she was leaving, I sat at the edge of the living room couch, hands clasped, staring at the muted television. The lamp threw an amber glow over the coffee table, the one we'd bought together 5 years earlier, back when we still spoke about the future like it was a promise written in ink. Now everything felt temporary, borrowed. Even the walls seemed to lean away from me, as if they too had chosen her side. Like what you hear. Hit like, spread the love by sharing, and subscribe so you never miss an update. Her suitcase was by the door, half open, stuffed with clothes that still smelled like our detergent. She stood near it, arms folded, face carefully blank. I remember thinking how someone could look so composed while destroying something so sacred. I think it's better if we make it official, she said, not looking at me. I've already spoken to a lawyer. My throat tightened. The word lawyer had a sharpness to it I wasn't prepared for. I'd thought maybe we were just having another argument, one of those heavy, emotional ones where you sleep apart for a few nights and then find your way back. But this was something else. You already did? I asked quietly. She nodded, eyes still avoiding mine. It's for the best, Mark. You know it's been over for a long time. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that we could fix it, that people go through rough patches, that love isn't something you throw away like an old photograph. But when I looked at her, I realized she wasn't asking for understanding. She was done. You can have the house, she said after a pause, like it was a line she'd rehearsed. I mean, she hesitated, you can stay until everything is sorted out. But it's probably better if I keep it. You can't afford to fight this, and that's when I interrupted her. I can't afford to fight this? Her eyes flicked toward me, quick, defensive. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, I said, standing now. My voice came out quieter than I expected. You think I can't afford a lawyer. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you take everything. She sighed, that long, patronizing exhale that used to drive me insane. Mark, you're not listening. This doesn't have to be ugly. I'm trying to make it easy for both of us. Easy. That word echoed in my head for days after. Easy. She left that night, suitcase in hand, leaving behind the faint smell of her perfume, that subtle, citrus scent I'd once loved waking up to. I sat on the couch until the morning light slipped through the blinds, watching it stretch across the carpet like time itself was moving on without me. In the days that followed, I moved through the house like a ghost. Her toothbrush still sat beside mine. Her coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim, was still on the counter. I couldn't bring myself to throw anything away. The silence was thick, not the comforting kind that comes after a long day, but the kind that feels like it's pressing on your chest, daring you to speak just so it can swallow the sound. Then came the papers. A thick white envelope slid under my door one afternoon, heavy and deliberate. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it was. Divorce papers. Legal language dressed up to look polite, cold signatures where love used to live. When I finally did open it, I saw what she wanted in neat bullet points. The house. The car. Half my savings. She'd written a small note in her handwriting. A final courtesy, maybe. Let's not drag this out. It's better for both of us. I don't know what stung more, the arrogance or the pity. I went for long walks after that, usually at night when the streets were empty. The world felt smaller somehow, quieter. I'd pass the park where we used to sit on summer evenings, where she'd rest her head on my shoulder and talk about the children we might have someday. Now the benches looked colder, like they knew something I didn't. My friends told me to lawyer up, to fight, to make her regret every demand. But I couldn't do it. Not because I agreed with her, I just didn't have the strength. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I'd lost the part of myself that cared about winning. So I told her, in a single text message, "Fine, take what you want." She didn't reply, but I saw the typing dots appear and disappear a few times before the screen went blank. That small, flickering hesitation, that was the last thing she ever gave me. Weeks passed. The legal process moved faster than I expected. She had connections, a family friend in real estate, a lawyer who owed her father a favor. She played it like a game of chess, each move deliberate, efficient. I was the pawn she'd already decided to sacrifice. The day I handed over the house keys, the sky was gray. Fitting. She showed up in her new car, a white SUV that still smelled like fresh leather. She looked good, calmer, lighter. I wondered if she'd ever loved me at all, or if I'd just been a chapter she'd outgrown. "Thanks for making this easy," she said as I placed the keys in her hand. I almost laughed. Easy. There was that word again. I left with 2 suitcases and a box of old photographs. Everything else, furniture, appliances, even the painting I'd done for our anniversary, stayed behind. She didn't look back when I walked down the driveway. Neither did I. For a while, I rented a small apartment downtown, one of those one-bedroom places with thin walls and flickering hallway lights. It smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness, the kind of place you live in when life has hit the reset button on you. At first, I tried to rebuild. I took on extra hours at work, tried dating, joined a gym, but nothing stuck. Every time I thought I was getting better, something small would pull me back. A song, a scent, a passing stranger who looked like her from behind. Then one evening I got a message. Not from her, from a mutual friend. You should see this. Attached was a photo. It was her. My ex-wife, standing on the balcony of the house I'd given up, holding a glass of wine, laughing with someone, a man I didn't recognize. But the photo wasn't what caught my attention. It was the caption, "Celebrating New Beginnings." There was a ring on her finger. I stared at that picture for a long time, feeling something deep inside me fracture. Not quite anger, not quite grief, something colder. I started remembering things then, little inconsistencies I'd ignored. The phone calls she'd take in the other room, the sudden overtime shifts that didn't add up, the way she'd stopped introducing me as her husband months before she left. And then it hit me. She hadn't just planned to leave me. She'd prepared for it. Every word, every gesture, every conversation we'd had in those final months. They weren't signs of indecision. They were part of the performance, a setup. She'd already found her new beginning long before she packed that suitcase. But here's the thing about losing everything. After a while, you stop fearing it. You start seeing the world differently. The noise fades, the expectations disappear, and what's left, if you're lucky, is clarity. That's when I made my decision. Not to hurt her, not to get revenge, but to take back something she thought I'd lost. My control. It started small. A phone call. A few documents I'd quietly saved. You see, before she left, she'd always handled the finances. Joint accounts, property taxes, investments, all under the illusion of partnership. What she didn't know was that I'd kept digital backups of everything. And one night, as I scrolled through those files, something unexpected caught my attention. A name, a company, a transaction that didn't belong. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't hers, but it was linked to the house. At first, I thought it was an error. Then I dug deeper. The more I looked, the more I realized the truth was buried right there in the paperwork, under her name, under her signature. She hadn't just taken the house. She'd taken something else too. Something she wasn't supposed to touch. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't sleep that night. The glow from my laptop was the only light in the room, painting everything in that cold, bluish hue that makes you feel like time has stopped. I went through every folder, every statement, every old email we'd exchanged. Years of shared accounts, merged responsibilities, passwords we'd promised never to change, all laid bare in front of me. The more I looked, the clearer it became. She hadn't just walked away with half. She'd taken everything she thought I wouldn't notice. There was a transaction listed 6 months before the divorce. A wire transfer, small enough to blend in, large enough to matter. It went to a company name I didn't recognize, Hartwell and Knox Consulting. I almost skipped it, assuming it was one of her freelance projects. But then I saw it again, and again. Each time, the same amount, the same date of the month like clockwork. $4,000. Every month. It didn't make sense. She worked as a designer, mostly freelance gigs. Nothing stable, nothing that could sustain that kind of regular payment. So who was she paying, and why? The deeper I dug, the stranger it got. The address listed for the company wasn't an office. It was a private residence in the same suburb where we used to live, the same street even. I stared at it for a while, feeling something cold run down my spine. That night I drove there. It was almost midnight, and the streets were empty. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same trimmed lawns, same flickering porch lights. Her house, my old house, sat 2 blocks away, its windows glowing faintly. I parked a few houses down from the address in the documents. The number matched. The mailbox read Hartwell. I sat there in silence, watching. No movement, no lights, just a soft hum of the street lamps. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something, a shadow at the window, a man's silhouette, tall, broad shoulders. For a moment my chest tightened. Then I saw her. Not clearly, but enough. Her hair tied up, her posture familiar, the way she tilted her head when she laughed. It was her. My ex-wife. It wasn't just a company. It was him. I left before they could see me. The drive back was quiet, but my mind was loud, replaying every moment, every lie. The long work calls, the sudden client dinners, the way she'd smile when she thought I wasn't looking. She hadn't been building a new life after me. She'd been building it during me. The next morning, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. But inside me, something had. Not anger, exactly, but clarity. That kind of cold realization that comes only after you've lost everything. That's when I made my choice. I wasn't going to fight her with lawyers or money. She'd already played that game and won. No, what I wanted now wasn't revenge. It was truth. I started keeping notes. Not plans, not evidence. Just thoughts. Observations. Fragments of memories I couldn't shake. I realized that our marriage hadn't ended when she left. It had been dying for years, quietly, in the spaces between conversations. I remembered the first time I noticed her slipping away. We'd been at dinner with friends. Someone had asked her how we were doing, and she'd laughed, a small, distant laugh. "We're surviving," she'd said, and everyone had chuckled. But I remember how my stomach dropped, because I knew she wasn't joking. She'd been gone long before she said the words out loud. Still, something about that company name, Hartwell and Knox, stuck with me. I started looking into it. At first, nothing came up. No website, no listings. Then, buried deep in a local business registry, I found it, registered under a holding firm. The owner's name, Daniel Hartwell. I didn't need to guess who he was. It took me 2 more days to find his LinkedIn profile. Real estate consultant. Married, or had been. A photo of him at some charity gala, standing beside my ex-wife. Her hand on his chest. That was the night I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Because the thing about being underestimated is, it gives you freedom. She thought I was broken, beaten, someone who'd fade quietly into the background of her success story. What she didn't know was that I still had one thing she'd never understand: patience. So I waited. For weeks, I said nothing. I went to work, came home, lived my life like a man learning how to breathe again. But quietly, I started pulling strings. I reached out to a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, a man named Cullen, who worked in property law. I told him everything. Not the emotional parts, not the betrayal, just the facts. When I mentioned Hartwell and Knox, he paused. "That name's familiar," he said. "Send me the details." 2 days later, he called back. "Mark, you're not going to like this." Apparently, Hartwell and Knox wasn't just a consulting company. It was a shell, one of several used to move funds between property investments. And one of those investments was the house she'd fought for, the one she'd said she wanted for stability. It was no longer in her name. 2 weeks after I'd handed over the keys, she'd transferred ownership to Hartwell and Knox Consulting. I remember sitting there, phone to my ear, staring at the wall. My pulse was steady, my mind strangely calm. "So," I said quietly, "she never wanted the house for herself." "No," Colin replied. "She wanted the asset. They're flipping it." Flipping it. The word felt dirty. She'd used me to secure it legally, then funneled it into their investment scheme. All that talk about fairness, closure, new beginnings. It was never about moving on. It was business. That realization should have broken me, but instead, it did something else. It focused me. I didn't tell Colin what I was going to do next. I just thanked him and hung up. Then, for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood the ending to our story and how to rewrite it. I spent the next few days collecting everything I had: digital copies of the bank transfers, the registration documents, the original mortgage agreements. I wasn't planning to expose her. Not yet. That would have been too easy, too clean. Instead, I wanted her to see it, to realize slowly that she'd built her new life on sand. So I reached out, casually, politely. A short message. Hey, I've been reviewing the final paperwork. There are some discrepancies in the property files. Nothing serious, just thought you'd want to know. It took her less than a minute to reply. What kind of discrepancies? That was the first time she'd texted me in 3 months. I could almost hear her voice in the words, controlled, careful. I waited a day before responding. Let's talk in person. Easier that way. She agreed. We met at a cafe near downtown, one of those neutral, quiet places where no one knows your history. She arrived early, looking immaculate as always, white blouse, gold earrings, that same confident posture I'd once admired. "Mark," she said with a practiced smile, "you look, well." "Do I asked. She laughed lightly, but her eyes were searching mine. "So, what's this about?" I slid a small folder across the table. I was cleaning up some old files. Found something interesting. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were printouts, copies of the wire transfers, the business registration, the property deed. Her expression didn't change immediately, but I saw it. That small flicker of recognition. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tightening. "I told you," I said. "Cleaning up." She flipped through the pages, her jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have these." "Why not? They're part of my records, too." Her eyes met mine, sharp now, defensive. "What do you want, Mark?" I took a sip of coffee. "Nothing. I just wanted to make sure you knew I knew." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the cafe filled the silence, the sound of milk steaming, chairs scraping, conversations rising and falling. Finally, she leaned forward. "You think you can threaten me?" I smiled faintly. "No, I don't threaten people. I just tell them the truth." She closed the folder slowly, her movements measured. "You don't understand how this works." "I do now," I said softly. "You took the house. You said I couldn't afford to fight you. You were right, but I never needed to fight you in court. You built your new life using something that doesn't legally belong to you." Her composure faltered, just slightly. "You can't prove—" "I can," I interrupted, "and I will, unless—" I paused, watching her carefully. "You give me what's mine." She stared at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes, small, flickering, but real. "I don't want your money," I continued. "I don't want revenge. I just want peace. You can keep your life, your company, your partner. Just make it right." She didn't respond. She just gathered the papers, stood up, and left. I watched her walk out of the cafe, shoulders stiff, chin high, but something in her stride had changed. She wasn't untouchable anymore. That night, I went home and sat in the dark, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Not the vengeful kind, not the desperate kind, just quiet certainty. Days passed without word. Then, a week later, I got another message. It was from her. "Check your account." I did. A transfer, the exact amount I'd lost in the divorce settlement, down to the last cent. No note, no explanation, just silence. I thought that would be the end, but fate, it seems, had one more twist to give. 2 months later, I got a call from Colin. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. Apparently, the Hartwell and Knox account had been frozen. Legal trouble, fraud allegations, misused funds, real estate malpractice. Daniel Hartwell, her new partner, had been arrested, and her name was all over the paperwork. The same documents she'd signed, the same signatures I'd shown her that day in the cafe. I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. The last time I saw her was months later, outside a courthouse. She didn't see me. She was thinner, paler, her once perfect posture slumped under the weight of something heavier than guilt, regret. And as I watched her walk through those doors, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just peace. Because sometimes the universe doesn't need your help to balance the scales. It just needs your patience. And for the first time in a long, long while, I finally understood what peace felt like. They say closure feels like freedom, but that's a lie. Closure doesn't arrive like sunlight through the blinds, warm and forgiving. It arrives like the sound of a door closing behind you. Sharp, final, echoing. And then you're left standing in the quiet, wondering if maybe you preferred the noise. After the courthouse incident, after I saw her disappear into that building, surrounded by people in suits and cameras, I thought I'd feel something triumphant. Vindicated, maybe, like the story had come full circle, the betrayed man who quietly outwitted the ones who took everything from him. But as the days passed, I realized there was no victory in it. Just silence. The kind that follows a storm. My apartment was still the same, small, Unremarkable, walls painted that cheap beige color landlords love. My life had resumed its rhythm: wake, work, eat, sleep. But something about the world had changed. Or maybe it was me. I didn't check the news when her case made the headlines. Friends sent me links, messages, gossip. I ignored them all. I didn't want to see her face in the papers or hear talking heads dissecting her mistakes. I'd spent years trying to understand her. I didn't need strangers doing it for me. What surprised me most was how quickly pity replaced resentment. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos, not the digital ones, but the real kind. The ones you hold in your hands, where time still feels tangible. There was one from a beach trip we took early in our marriage. She was laughing, hair windblown, face sunburned. I remember taking that photo. She'd insisted I put the camera down and enjoy the view, but I told her, "You are the view." And for a moment, she'd believed me. I ran my thumb over the photo's edge until it bent slightly. That was when I realized I'd been holding on to an image of her that never really existed. The woman I fell in love with and the woman who stood in that courtroom were two different people. Maybe they always were. Maybe love is just what happens when you choose not to see the difference. The truth is, I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself, for ignoring the signs, for believing that love alone could fix what was already broken, for letting her define my worth. So I started to rebuild, not in the way people usually mean when they say that. I didn't rush to find someone new or start a new project. I rebuilt in quieter ways. I started walking again, not aimlessly like before, but with purpose. There's a trail by the river, lined with trees that change color in the fall. I'd go there after work, let the sound of water drown out my thoughts. Sometimes I'd sit for hours, watching the current carry away leaves and debris, small, forgotten things that once clung to something bigger. That's how I began to forgive myself, by realizing that life, much like that river, never stops moving. A few weeks later, I got a letter. Not an email, not a message, a real handwritten letter. The handwriting was hers. My pulse quickened as I opened it. It wasn't long, just a single page. "Mark, you were right, about everything. I wanted to hate you for it, but I can't. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't, if I were you. But I need you to know that not everything between us was a lie. There were moments that were real. Even if they don't mean much now, they meant something then. They told me I might lose everything, the house, the accounts, even my license. And for once, I don't care. Maybe I needed to lose it all to understand what I did to you. If you ever think of me, I hope it's not with anger. I hope you find peace, real peace, the kind I never could." I read it twice, then again. Her handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places, like she'd cried while writing. For the first time since she'd left, I felt something I couldn't name. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need an epilogue, but that letter lingered in my mind for weeks. Not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. She'd said I might lose everything. Not I will. It made me wonder, what if she hadn't? What if she'd found a way, yet again, to slip through the cracks? One night, months later, I got my answer. It was late, around midnight, when I heard a knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I froze. She was standing there, not polished or composed like before. She looked different, worn, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Her hair was shorter, uneven. Her eyes, once so sharp, now carried something else. Humility, maybe, or defeat. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside without saying a word. She stood in the middle of the room, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. I realized she'd never been there before. Our home had always been the one she took from me. "I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. I stayed silent. She turned to face me, her voice trembling slightly. "They froze my accounts. The house, it's gone. Everything's gone." I nodded. "I heard." She looked at me like she was waiting for judgment, maybe even cruelty. But I had none left to give. "I didn't come for sympathy," she said quickly. I wanted to apologize in person." I gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head. "I can't stay. I just needed you to know that I get it now. What I did, what it cost." I studied her. The same woman who once said I couldn't afford a lawyer, now standing in front of me with nothing. It should have felt poetic. It didn't. "You didn't just take the house," I said quietly. "You took my faith, in love, in myself. That's harder to rebuild than money." Her eyes glistened. I know, I see that now, and I'm sorry, truly. We stood there in silence, two ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This was yours," she said, handing it to me. I opened it slowly. Inside was the deed to the house. "It's still in my name," she said, "but it won't be for long. I'm signing it back over to you. I already started the transfer." I looked at her stunned. "Why?" "Because it's the only thing I can give back," she said softly, "and because I can't carry it anymore." I didn't know what to say. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, I said, "Lena." She stopped. "I forgive you." She stood there for a long moment, then nodded once, a small, fragile motion, and walked out into the night. That was the last time I ever saw her. I didn't transfer the house back right away. I couldn't. It felt too heavy, too loaded with memories I wasn't ready to face. But a few weeks later I drove there, to the house that had once been ours. It was empty. Quiet, the garden overgrown, paint peeling from the porch. Time had stripped it of all the beauty she once fought for. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, remembering laughter, arguments, the smell of Sunday morning pancakes, the way sunlight used to spill through the kitchen window. When I reached the living room, the same place where she'd first told me she wanted out, I sat down on the bare floor, and for the first time I cried. Not for her, not for what I'd lost, but for the man I'd been, the one who believed love was something you could hold on to if you just tried hard enough. That day, I made peace with my past. I didn't need to sell the house or keep it. I just needed to let it go. So I did. I donated it. Signed the deed over to a local housing foundation that helped families start fresh. When the papers were finalized, I stood outside one last time, feeling the wind move through the empty windows. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like release. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, not to look back, but to make sure it was really behind me. And it was. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing closure. I was living it. The house was gone. The papers were signed. And for a while, I thought that was where my story ended. But life has a strange way of circling back, not to punish you, but to show you what you missed the first time around. A few months after I gave the house away, I started volunteering at the same housing foundation I'd signed it over to. It felt right, to help other people start fresh the way I was trying to. Every week I'd sit across from families filling out forms, listening to stories that sounded eerily familiar, marriages that fell apart, lost jobs, debts, broken promises. It was humbling, healing even. I started to realize that pain wasn't unique to me. It was just my version of a universal story, the one where people love, lose, and try again. One afternoon, while sorting donation files in the small office, the coordinator, a kind woman named Martha, handed me a thin manila folder. "This one's yours," she said with a faint smile. I frowned. "Mine? Technically, yes. You donated this property, but we're processing a family for it now. Thought you might want to meet them before the move-in date." I hesitated. I hadn't been back since that last day. Part of me wanted to keep it that way, but another part, the quiet, curious part, wanted to see it once more, not as a ghost haunting old walls, but as a witness to something new. So I said yes. 2 days later, I drove back. The moment the house came into view, I felt that familiar ache. Not grief exactly, just the weight of memory. The garden had been cleaned up, the windows replaced. It didn't look haunted anymore. It looked alive. There was a car parked in the driveway, a modest old sedan. On the porch, a woman knelt beside a little boy, helping him tie his shoelaces. She looked up as I approached, smiling with that gentle politeness strangers give. "You must be Mr. Lorne," she said. "Martha told us you'd stop by." I nodded. "Just Mark, please." She extended her hand. "I'm Claire, and this little troublemaker is Ben." The boy grinned shyly before darting behind her leg. "Beautiful place," she said, glancing up at the house. "You really did something kind here." I looked around, at the trimmed hedges, the faint scent of fresh paint, the sound of a child's laughter echoing down the hallway through an open window, and realized she was right. I had done something kind, not just for them, for me. We talked for a few minutes, small talk mostly. Then I excused myself, saying I just wanted to take one last walk around the property before they officially moved in. Inside, everything was different, repainted, refurbished. Yet under the newness, I could still feel the shape of what used to be. The room where we'd once celebrated anniversaries. The corner where her suitcase had stood the night she left. The wall where we'd hung our first photo as husband and wife. But the ghosts were quieter now. I ended up in the kitchen, the same place where I'd last seen her handwriting, signing those fateful papers. I stood by the window, watching sunlight fall across the counter, and for the first time I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the pain, for the loss, for every wrong turn that had led me here, to this exact moment of calm. I was about to leave when I noticed something. A small envelope tucked behind the loose panel beneath the kitchen sink. At first, I thought it was just an old utility bill, but the way it was sealed, carefully, intentionally, made me pause. The paper had yellowed slightly, the ink faded around the edges. My name was written across the front. Mark. My heart stuttered. It was her handwriting. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it, afraid to open it, as if doing so would drag me backward into a life I'd worked so hard to leave behind. But curiosity has a way of unraveling resolve. I opened it. Inside was a single letter, folded neatly, written in that same trembling script I'd seen once before. If you ever find this, it means you came back. I hid it here because I knew you wouldn't destroy the house. Not really. I knew somehow you'd make sure it found a better purpose. That's who you are, Mark. That's who you always were. By the time you read this, I don't know what my life will look like. Maybe I've moved on. Maybe I've fallen apart. But there are things I need you to know. Not for forgiveness, but for truth. Daniel and I, it wasn't what you think. It started as business, but I let it become something else. I told myself I loved him because he made me feel powerful again, something I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't love. It was escape from guilt, from failure, from you. You didn't fail me, Mark. I failed myself. I let fear turn into resentment, and resentment into selfishness. And by the time I realized it, I'd already built a life on lies I couldn't undo. When everything fell apart, I thought about you more than I should have. About the quiet ways you loved me, the coffee every morning, the way you listened even when I didn't deserve it. You were never weak, Mark. You were brave in ways I wasn't. If I could go back, I wouldn't ask for the house. I'd ask for time, for another morning to try again. But life doesn't give that kind of mercy. So instead, I'll leave this truth behind, hoping it finds you when you're ready to hear it. You were my home, long before the walls we built around it. I stood there for what felt like hours, reading those words again and again. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology. It was something in between, a bridge between what was and what could never be. And in that fragile moment, I understood something I'd been too proud to see before. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting them go without carrying their weight anymore. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back where I'd found it, and stepped outside. Claire and her son were laughing near the front steps, their voices bright against the fading afternoon light. "You okay?" she asked as I approached. I nodded. "Yeah, just saying goodbye." She smiled softly. "Then I think you did it right." On the drive home, I rolled the windows down. The wind rushed in, cool and alive. For once, I didn't replay the past or imagine alternate endings. I just was. That night, I slept without dreams. When morning came, the world felt new, not brighter, not easier, but clearer. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched sunlight creep across the floor of my small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A few weeks later, I received an email from Martha. The family had moved in. She attached a photo, Claire and Ben standing on the porch, smiling, holding a small sign that said home. For some reason, I saved that photo, not because of the house, but because of what it represented. The proof that endings can grow into beginnings if you let them. Years have passed since then. I don't think about her often anymore. But every now and then, something will remind me. A scent, a song, a flicker of memory, and I'll feel that familiar ache, gentle now, like an old scar in the rain. I don't resent it. It's just proof that I lived. The last twist, the one I never saw coming, arrived quietly, like most truths do. One evening, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Mr. Lorne, I'm calling from St. Augustine Hospice." My heart sank. She continued gently, "We found your contact information listed under a patient's emergency file. Her name is Lena Hartwell." For a moment, I couldn't speak. She asked that we call you, the woman said softly. She doesn't have family listed. She said you'd understand. I drove there that night. The hospice sat on the outskirts of town, quiet and still, the kind of place where time slows down out of respect. When I entered her room, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller somehow, fragile, her once bright eyes dulled but still familiar. She smiled weakly when she saw me. You came, I nodded, standing awkwardly by the door. They said you wanted to see me. I don't have much time, she whispered, and I didn't want it to end without saying goodbye properly this time. I moved closer, sitting beside her bed. The room smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. I read your letter, I said quietly. The one in the house. Her eyes flickered with surprise. You found it? I did. Then you know, she whispered. I nodded. For a long moment we sat in silence. Then she said, I used to think love was about possession, about holding on, but you taught me it's about letting go, even when it hurts. Her breathing was shallow, but her voice was steady. You gave me that chance, Mark. You let me face myself. I never thanked you for that. I swallowed hard. You don't have to. I do, she said softly, because for all my lies, the one truth that never changed was this. I loved you, in the only way I knew how. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her again, that I wished her peace, that everything was okay now, but the words caught in my throat, so instead I took her hand. It was cold, delicate. She closed her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips, and just like that, she was gone. The monitor flatlined softly, and the nurse stepped in, but I already knew. I sat there for a while, holding her hand long after the warmth had faded, not out of grief, but out of gratitude for the chance to finish what we'd both left undone. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back once, whispering the words I'd never gotten to say. Goodbye, Lena. Outside, the night air was cool. The sky was clear, scattered with stars, and for the first time I felt a strange sense of completion. Not happiness, not relief, just quiet acceptance. Because life doesn't always give you the closure you want. Sometimes it gives you the closure you need and asks you to make peace with the difference. As I drove home, I thought about how everything comes full circle eventually. The house, the love, the loss, all of it had been temporary. But the lesson, the growth, the quiet strength that followed, that was mine to keep. When I reached my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window. The city was alive beneath me, people laughing, lights flickering, stories unfolding. And somewhere out there, I like to think she found her peace too, in whatever way the universe allows. Because maybe that's what redemption really is. Not erasing the past, but learning to carry it gently until it no longer weighs you down. It's been years since that night at the hospice. Sometimes I still wake up before dawn and sit by the window, watching the slow bloom of light over the city. I drink my coffee in silence and listen to the hum of life outside, the distant rush of cars, the low murmur of people starting their days. The world keeps moving, indifferent and beautiful, and I've learned that's a kind of grace. I've built something small but steady now. I teach carpentry at a community center, helping people rebuild what was broken, not just with wood and nails, but with patience and trust. Every time I see a father and son sanding a plank together, arguing about angles and laughing anyway, I feel that quiet ache of recognition. Life goes on, and sometimes it even gets better. I don't wear a wedding ring anymore. I don't keep photos of the past around me, but I do carry memories, not as wounds, but as reminders. Each one a lesson in what it means to love, to fail, to forgive. The letter she left still rests in my drawer, unopened since that day at the house. I don't need to read it again. I already know what it says. When people ask if I regret it, giving up the house, walking away, letting her go, I always say no. Because that loss gave me something I didn't even know I was missing, myself. Redemption doesn't come with triumph. It comes quietly, disguised as acceptance. One day you just stop asking why things happened the way they did, and you start asking what they were meant to teach you. And in that shift, that tiny change of focus, everything begins to make sense. So I keep living. Not to rewrite the past, but to honor it, to take what was broken and make something new out of it. That's all any of us can really do. Keep building, keep forgiving, keep walking toward whatever light is left. And sometimes, when the wind carries the scent of jasmine through my open window, I smile. because somewhere in the strange arithmetic of life, I like to think we both got what we needed, even if it wasn't what we wanted. When someone you love betrays your trust, do you measure forgiveness by whether they deserve it, or by whether you deserve peace? If losing everything forced you to confront who you truly are, would you fight to reclaim the past, or would you learn to start again without it? And when the dust finally settles, will you have the courage to see that redemption doesn't come from revenge or victory, but from the quiet act of forgiving the person you once were?